here before me, and I sense in the silence of your listening hearts that you have known this very pain, the inexplicable burden of being resented for the very thing that makes you tender and alive. To be an empath is not merely to feel the emotions of others, but to embody them as though they were your own, to carry them deep into your psychic bloodstream until you are unsure whether the sorrow you weep belongs to you or to the stranger sitting beside you. And yet, instead of gratitude, instead of honor, often what greets you is disdain, suspicion, envy, or even hatred. Why is it so? Why are the most porous souls, those whose boundaries dissolve to absorb the invisible currents of another's pain, so often treated as scapegoats, ridiculed, or cast aside? Let us enter into this question together, not with the cold logic of the scientist, but with the living fire of the psyche, with the symbols, dreams, and archetypal truths that guide us through the underworld of human experience. The resentment directed toward the empath is not born from their failure, but rather from their uncanny capacity to mirror what others cannot face. When you stand in the presence of one who feels too much, if you stand before a mirror that reveals your own buried shadow, the empath draws out of you what you have repressed, and you despise them, not for their weakness, but for the truth they awaken within you. Imagine a dream. A figure of light appears in the night, and instead of rejoicing at its illumination, you recoil, for it reveals the stains upon your garments. The empath is that dream figure, the one who cannot help but uncover the stains upon the human soul simply by existing. But this story is older than your personal life. It is woven into myth and archetype. Consider the scapegoat, the one chosen in ancient ritual to carry the sins of the tribe into the wilderness. Why was the goat chosen? Not because it was guilty, but because the community required a vessel into which to pour all its unowned darkness. The empath today often plays this role unconsciously, absorbing into their tender nervous system the projections of others, becoming the silent bearer of collective shadow. It is not weakness that makes them resented, but their archetypal position as a carrier of burdens that others refuse to shoulder. In this way, their very gift becomes their curse, and the unconscious hatred they attract is nothing less than the echo of humanity's age-old fear of its own hidden self. Let me tell you a story of a patient, a woman whose sensitivity was so pronounced that she could enter a room and immediately feel the undercurrents of hostility, sorrow, or deceit that no one dared to speak aloud. At first, she thought herself blessed with intuition, a sixth sense of sorts, and she used it to soothe, to comfort, to bring harmony. But gradually, she noticed the way others began to turn against her, whispering that she was strange, too emotional, even dangerous. Why? Because she had unknowingly become the oracle who exposed what they would not face. Each smile she interpreted, each tremor of voice she discerned, became a revelation of hypocrisy. And people feared her as they fear the prophet who names their hidden sins. To be resented in this way is to walk the archetypal path of Cassandra, cursed to speak truth that no one wishes to hear, condemned to isolation by the very power that makes her luminous. You must understand that resentment is the child of unconsciousness. It arises not when one is truly wronged, but when one is confronted with a truth they cannot assimilate. And the empath, by their very being, is a walking confrontation. They carry the archetype of the wounded healer, the one whose openness heals others, but simultaneously exposes the infection of unhealed wounds. To resent the empath is to resent the wound within oneself. And the hatred they receive is, but the hatred a person feels toward a mirror, when it shows a face they do not wish to recognize. Consider dreams again. Many of you have dreamt of being pursued, of running from an unknown figure. This figure is often the shadow, the rejected part of oneself. In waking life, the empath frequently becomes that figure for others, embodying the very qualities they cannot acknowledge. When you feel too much, you expose how little they allow themselves to feel. When you suffer for the pain of others, you reveal their numbed indifference. When you extend compassion, you highlight their hidden cruelty. Thus, they chase you, reject you, resent you, not because you have wronged them, but because you reveal their estrangement from their own soul. It is a paradox. The more purely you embody the archetype of the heart, the more you awaken the archetype of resistance in others. This resentment has a peculiar energy, an almost sacred hostility, as though society instinctively senses that too much empathy is dangerous to its order. Why? Because empathy dissolves boundaries, undermines power, equalizes suffering. In a world built upon dominance, masks, and the repression of weakness, the empath is subversive. They remind humanity of its fragile interconnection, and this reminder is intolerable to those who wish to rule, to manipulate, to maintain illusion. Thus, resentment becomes the weapon of the collective ego against the solitary soul who dares to feel. But do not think this condemnation falls upon you alone. It is archetypal. Christ upon the cross bore not only physical torment, but the resentment of the multitude, who projected upon him their fear, envy, and guilt. Socrates drank hemlock not because he committed a crime, but because his presence revealed the ignorance of Athens. The empath walks in this lineage, carrying within their fragile heart the same archetypal destiny, to embody what others cannot bear and to suffer their rejection as the price of truth. This is why I tell you, resentment is not a personal verdict, but a universal reaction to the archetype you embody. It is not your fault, though it is your burden. No, let you descend deeper. Resentment arises not only from projection, but also from envy. The empath has a gift most secretly desire, but cannot claim: the ability to penetrate the invisible, to sense what lies beneath appearances. This is a kind of second sight, an intuition that approaches the mystical, and those who cannot access it envy you, though they will never admit it. Their envy twists into resentment, and they disguise their admiration with scorn. They tell you that you are too sensitive, too fragile, when what they truly mean is that they feel numb by comparison, alienated from the living pulse of the psyche that flows so freely through you. Your pain becomes their accusation, your tears their reminder of their own dryness, and so, to shield themselves from the unbearable knowledge of their deadened hearts, they ridicule you, despise you, reject you. But hear me clearly. Your sensitivity is not weakness, it is initiation. To feel as you do is to be in constant dialogue with the unconscious, to live not only in the outer world, but in the depths where archetypes breathe and dream symbols shimmer with meaning. It is to walk with one foot in this world and one in the next, to serve as the bridge between the human and the divine. The resentment you endure is the tax imposed upon such a position. It is a shadow's revenge against the light you bear. Yet if you endure it consciously, if you recognize it for what it is, it can transform from curse to vocation, from wound to wisdom. When we look closer, resentment towards the empath can be understood as a form of psychic defense. It is the psyche's attempt to protect itself from drowning in the unbearable waters of its own unconscious. The empath, through their very presence, stirs those waters. They touch the hidden grief, the buried rage, the unacknowledged longing, and bring it nearer to the surface. To the ordinary man or woman, this feels like a threat. Their carefully constructed persona, the mask they wear to function in society, begins to crack. And when that mask trembles, panic arises. The ego cries out, "This one must be silenced. This one must be resented. This one must be cast out." So the empath becomes the lightning rod for collective anxiety. What is resented is not the individual person, but the archetypal disturbance. They represent the intruder who awakens the unconscious. You see, the empath embodies the archetype of the anima or animus. Depending on the context, they are often the carriers of the unlived soul image for others. When a man represses his anima, when he refuses to integrate the feminine sensitivity and tenderness within himself, he is likely to project it onto a woman who embodies these qualities, but instead of loving her, he resents her, for she carries the key to the part of him he cannot unlock, and her presence reminds him of his incompleteness. Similarly, a woman who represses her animus may find herself strangely hostile to a man of deep perception and emotional resonance. Resentment here is born of the refusal to integrate the fear of one's own wholeness. Thus, the empath becomes the battlefield of archetypal forces that others are unwilling to confront within themselves. Let me tell you of a dream. A man dreams that he's walking through a great cathedral. In the center stands a pool of water, still and clear. He approaches and sees his reflection, but to his horror, the reflection is not his face. It is the face of another. Is someone he knows, someone he dislikes. He awakens in fear and confusion. What does this dream mean? It reveals projection. The qualities he despises in the other are but the unclaimed parts of himself. Now imagine living as an empath, being the pool in the cathedral of other souls. Every person who looks into you sees not you, but the reflection of their own denied image. Is it any wonder then that they resent you? You reveal them to themselves, and they are not ready to bear the sight. In this sense, resentment toward empaths is not merely personal, but archetypal. It is the ancient drama of shadow and light. The empath lives as a shadow bearer, carrying within their nervous system what others cast out. And to the unconscious of society, this figure is always dangerous, for the unconscious seeks to remain unconscious. It resists illumination. The empath is like a lantern in the darkened cellar of the psyche. And the cellar dwellers, those repressed instincts and memories, cry out in fury when the light is turned on. They would rather shatter the lantern than be seen, but here lies the paradox. Though the empath suffers resentment, they are also secretly needed, just as the scapegoat carried away the sins of the tribe. The empath performs a psychic service. They balance the field by absorbing what others will not. They prevent explosions by containing tension within themselves. They hold the grief that society cannot afford to acknowledge. And in this, they resemble the archetype of the wounded healer, Jung, the centaur who could heal others but not himself. is the mythical image of this destiny. His wound did not disable his gift. Rather, it gave him the power to heal. Likewise, the empath's suffering under resentment is not meaningless. It is the crucible in which their gift is refined. Yet I must warn you, if the empath does not become conscious of this dynamic, they risk annihilation. To carry others' projections unconsciously is to drown in them. The resentment of others, internalized, becomes self-hatred. The empath begins to believe the accusations. I am too much. I am weak. I am strange. I am wrong. This is the great danger. For then the gift collapses under the weight of the shadow, and the empath loses their own center. Many of the most sensitive souls retreat into isolation, depression, even madness, not because they lacked strength, but because they were unaware of the archetypal role they played. Consciousness is the shield. To know that resentment is projection, to understand that one is carrying not only personal burdens, but archetypal tensions, is to reclaim power. It is to step from victimhood into vocation. In analysis, I have often observed this moment of awakening. The empath begins by lamenting, why do they hate me for what I cannot change? Slowly, through dream work, through symbolic understanding, they begin to see that their suffering is part of a larger pattern. They are living out the myth of the scapegoat, the path of the healer, the destiny of the mirror. And once this is understood, the resentment of others no longer crushes them. Instead, it is seen as inevitable, even meaningful. They can bear it not as a personal failure, but as participation in the drama of the collective unconscious. This shift from personal wound to archetypal destiny is the beginning of individuation. Now imagine the empath who integrates this truth. They no longer collapse under resentment, nor do they retaliate. They stand as a witness, knowing this is not mine. This is the shadow of the other. I need not drink their poison. And in this dance, they become not merely a mirror, but a guide. For the empath's true vocation is not to absorb endlessly, but to illuminate by holding their own boundaries. By speaking their truth without fear, they force others to reckon with themselves. The resentment may intensify at first, for the light grows brighter, but eventually, for those willing, this light becomes the very path to healing. Let me return to dreams once more. For the unconscious speaks most clearly there. Picture a dream of a burning house. The dreamer rushes inside, rescuing others, but is accused by those he saves of having started the fire. This is the plight of the empath. They sense the flames before anyone else. They rush into the psychic blaze to help, but because they are present at the site of crisis, others suspect them, resent them, blame them. Yet the dream also shows the truth. Without them, no one would have survived. Such is the paradox of the empathic vocation, to be both accused and indispensable, resented and yet essential. You must also recognize that resentment is not always conscious hostility. It often disguises itself as subtle withdrawal, avoidance, or sarcasm. People may not attack you openly, but you feel the shift. Their eyes no longer meet yours. Their voices tighten. They minimize your feelings. They label you dramatic. This is resentment in its quieter form, and it wounds just as deeply. But again, it reveals not your flaw, but their fear. They fear that your openness will awaken what they have buried. They fear the collapse of their carefully curated persona. In this sense, their resentment is a compliment, for it testifies to the power of your presence. You are dangerous, not because you harm, but because you reveal. And here, I must speak to you as though you are sitting across from me in the consulting room. With all your pain laid bare, you ask, what then am I to do? If my very being provokes resentment, am I condemned to loneliness? I say to you, no, you are not condemned, but you are chosen. To walk this path is to walk a narrow road, but it leads to depth and authenticity. You must learn to discern between those who resent you from fear and those who, though wounded, are willing to face the truth. You reflect, the former will flee or attack, the latter will stay. However, trembling, these few will become your true companions, for they will have the courage to meet themselves through you. Do not waste your soul on those determined to remain blind. Your task is not to convert, but to bear witness. Resentment will follow you as a shadow, but it need not destroy you. Indeed, if you learn to hold it, it becomes a kind of initiation. For resentment is the fire in which your own ego is tempered. It teaches you detachment. It forces you to anchor yourself, not in the approval of others, but in the truth of your own soul. This is individuation, to stand firm in who you are, even when the world recoils, to say, yes, I am sensitive, yes, I feel too much, yes, I am the mirror you cannot bear, but I will not deny my nature. In such a declaration, resentment loses its sting. It becomes background noise to the music of your calling. And so, I tell you, do not despair when you are resented. See it as a sign that you are fulfilling your archetypal role, like the prophet ignored, like the healer scorned, like the dreamer mocked. You carry within your being a truth that unsettles. This is not weakness, it is destiny. You are the threshold where shadow and light meet, and though many will resent you for it, some will be saved by it. There's an ancient rhythm in the way resentment moves. It coils itself like a serpent in the human heart, hissing whenever the soul is confronted with what it has not yet dared to know. The empath, unknowingly, becomes the charmer of such serpents by their mere presence, by the radiance of their sensitivity. They summon forth what lies hidden beneath the stones of consciousness. And the serpent, threatened, strikes not at the darkness itself, but at the one who has disturbed its sleep. This is why the empath is so often struck, bitten by resentment's venom, accused of stirring chaos, when in truth they have only revealed what was already festering. But the venom, paradoxically, is also the cure. To be resented is to be initiated into a deeper knowledge of the psyche's mechanics. When you are the target of resentment, you stand at the gateway to understanding projection, shadow, and the archetypal battle between ego and soul. Most people never glimpse this battlefield. They live within its smoke and clash unconsciously. But you, the empath, are thrust into it again and again. You are made to see what others deny. The pain of this position is immense, but so too is its wisdom, for each act of resentment becomes a lesson. Here is what people hide. Here is what they fear. Here is what they cannot love within themselves. And slowly, if you do not collapse, you begin to see through the veil of human masks, you become a seer, though you never asked for the gift. Let us descend further into the symbolic. Imagine the archetype of the mirror. It is not merely glass reflecting an image. It is the sacred surface upon which the soul encounters itself. But what happens when a person gazes into a mirror and sees not beauty but distortion, not virtue but wound? Rage arises, the mirror is blamed, accused of lying, cursed for the truth it reveals, yet the mirror does nothing but reflect. So it is with the empath. You mirror not only the joy of others, but their fracture, their denied hunger, a cruelty, their shame. You hold it without trying, and this is intolerable to them. So they resent you, as if you had invented their darkness rather than revealed it. In dreams, mirrors often shatter. This shattering symbolizes the ego's resistance to seeing itself fully, and when others resent you, they are in fact attempting to shatter you, to break the mirror you hold before them. But here lies your task, to remain whole, to hold your reflective surface steady, even under assault. For when the mirror does not break, when it endures, something miraculous happens. Eventually, the one who resents may glimpse the truth within themselves and, though reluctantly, begin to transform. This is the alchemy of the empath. To endure resentment long enough that it ripens into self-recognition in the other. Few will walk this path with you, but those who do will emerge renewed. Now, let us explore the mystical paradox more deeply. The empath is both loved and hated, sought and shunned. Many will come to you for comfort, for your presence soothes wounds they cannot name. But once you reflect too much truth, they recoil. It is as if you are a well in the desert. They come to drink when they are thirsty. But if the water reveals their own reflection too clearly, they accuse the well of poisoning them. This oscillation between attraction and resentment is the empath's constant experience, and it is bewildering. For you wonder, am I healer or enemy, gift or curse? In truth, you are both, for the archetype always contains opposites. To embody empathy is to embody contradiction, the balm and the blade, the comfort and the exposure. I recall again the figure of Christ, for in him we see the archetype of empathy made flesh. He healed, he forgave, he absorbed the pain of the multitude, and yet he was despised, mocked, crucified. Why? Because the very light that healed also revealed. His presence uncovered the hypocrisy of the powerful, the hardness of hearts, the refusal of love. He was resented, not for failure, but for too much success in embodying the soul's truth. In him, as in the empath, we see that to carry empathy fully is to invite both worship and hatred, both gratitude and betrayal. The crowd that cries, Hosanna, one day cries, crucify him, the next. This is the archetypal fate of the empathic soul. But do not despair, for hidden within resentment is an alchemical fire. When you are resented, you are burned. Yes, but what is burned away is illusion. You learn that approval is fickle, that belonging in the crowd is dangerous, that your worth cannot be measured by others' comfort. Slowly, painfully, you are initiated into a deeper grounding. Your worth rests in your alignment with truth, not in the acceptance of others. And this, though it feels like death, is liberation. You become less dependent on praise, less wounded by scorn, and more anchored in the eternal reality of your own soul. This transformation is not easy, but it is necessary if you are to survive your vocation. I remember a dream shared by a young man, an empath, crushed by years of resentment. He dreamt he was carrying a heavy sack filled with stones. Each stone labeled with the names of people he knew. The sack grew heavier with each step until finally he collapsed. Out of despair, he tore the sack open and saw that the stones were not solid. They crumbled into dust when touched. He awoke with a strange sense of freedom. The meaning was clear. The weight of others' projections, the resentment he bore, was not solid truth, but dust masquerading as stone. Once he saw it for what it was, it lost its crushing power. So too with you. The resentment you feel pressing upon you is not truth, it is projection, shadow dust. Only when you awaken to this can you put down the sack and walk free. But freedom does not mean abandonment of your gift. It means using it consciously. To be an empath without consciousness is to be a sponge, absorbing endlessly until you disintegrate. To be an empath with consciousness is to be an alchemist, transforming resentment into understanding, projection into revelation. You do not merely feel, you interpret, you illuminate, you hold boundaries while still carrying depth, and in this way you shift from victim of resentment to master of its energy. Yet you must also learn discernment. Not all are ready to face themselves, and you are not called to bleed for every soul. You must learn when to hold a mirror and when to turn it away, when to speak and when to be silent. This is not betrayal of your gift, but the maturation of it. Even Christ did not cast pearls before swine. The empath who pours themselves into every void will be emptied and despised, but the empath who discerns where their presence is truly received becomes a vessel of transformation. And this, I say, is the true purpose of your path. The resentment you endure is therefore both a trial and a teacher. It forces you to confront your own wounds, your own longing for approval, your own fear of rejection. It purifies you until you no longer seek to be loved for your sensitivity, but rather stand firm in it, regardless of the response. This is individuation, to embody the archetype consciously, to carry your empathy not as a curse but as a destiny, to stand as a living reminder that humanity is interconnected. No matter how much it resents being reminded, I tell you this, the empath is a guardian of the soul's truth. The resentment you face is evidence of the soul's resistance to awakening. Do not interpret it as condemnation, but as confirmation. You disturb because you reveal, and to reveal is your calling. If you endure, if you hold your mirror steady, you will not only survive, but guide others into the hidden chambers of themselves. Some will always resent you, but a few, a precious few, will awaken because of you. And that, my friends, is worth the burden. When we speak of resentment toward empaths, we must not imagine it as merely an interpersonal phenomenon, as though it were only the pain of one soul against another. No, it is something far larger, woven into the fabric of collective life. Entire societies, entire epochs, have risen in fear and hostility toward the sensitive, the prophetic, the soul bearers. What you feel in your personal existence echoes through history and myth. For the collective unconscious repeats itself in patterns across ages, and so the resentment directed at empaths is not only your neighbor's discomfort or your family's rejection. It is civilization's way of defending itself against the trembling voice of its own forgotten soul. Think of how cultures have treated their seers, their oracles, their mystics, often revered, yet just as often banished, imprisoned, or burned. Why? Because these figures embodied too much empathy, too much transparency to the psychic undercurrents of their time. They saw what the collective wished to repress: hypocrisy, cruelty, the violence beneath polished order. Societies, like individuals, carry shadows. They repress entire histories of bloodshed, domination, exploitation, and silence, and the empath, by their attunement, senses this. They speak it, they cry it, sometimes without words, but through the sheer radiance of their being, and the collective reacts as the individual does, with resentment, with projection, with violence. In the Middle Ages, women who felt deeply, who healed with herbs, who listened to the whispers of the forest and the suffering of the sick, were accused of witchcraft. Their empathy was transmuted by the collective into suspicion, their closeness to nature into a pact with the devil. They were resented because they carried the repressed soul of a patriarchal age, the feminine principle of care, intuition, and connection. To kill them was to kill what society feared most in itself. To resent them was to shield the fragile order of a world built upon repression of the feminine. The empath has always been in danger, not because of what they do, but because of what they reveal in the collective psyche. If in modern times this pattern persists, a culture driven by speed, competition, and productivity has little tolerance for those who feel too much. Empaths are labeled weak, unfit for the ruthless economy of perpetual striving. They are resented in workplaces, in schools, in families, for they refuse, whether consciously or not, to conform to the numbing required by the system. They remind the culture that human beings are not machines, and for that they are despised. Yet, secretly, the culture also longs for them, for it is starving for the very qualities it resents. The empath becomes the collective scapegoat, carrying not only the personal shadows of those around them, but the shadow of the entire age. Let us turn again to symbols, for the psyche speaks in images. In one dream reported by a patient, a great city appeared, gleaming with glass towers, but beneath the city was a labyrinth, dark and twisting, filled with voices crying out. The dreamer wandered the city above, pretending not to hear. But whenever she encountered a particular figure, a man with eyes full of sorrow, the cries grew louder. She resented him deeply, though he had done nothing, because his presence forced her to hear what she had silenced. This dream is not of one individual, but of the whole modern world. The city is civilization, proud and glittering. The labyrinth below is the collective unconscious, with all its forgotten pain, and the empath is a sorrowful figure whose presence awakens the cries. The resentment that follows is the city's resentment toward its own underworld. Now, imagine this drama playing out not only in dreams, but in history. Entire groups have carried the empathic function for societies, and entire groups have borne resentment for it. The artists, the mystics, the prophets, the marginalized, all have often been treated with suspicion, precisely because they carried the collective wounds. Their songs, their visions, their very existence reflected truths that society could not bear to see, and so they were resented, oppressed, silenced. The empathic individual today repeats on a small scale what these groups endured on a massive one. To embody empathy is to become the living mirror of the collective shadow. Yet here lies the hidden paradox again. The very resentment you receive is proof of your necessity. If the empaths were irrelevant, they would be ignored, but they are not ignored, they are felt too strongly, resented, mocked, even attacked. This is because they touch the nerve of the collective unconscious, and what touches the nerve has the power to heal. The resentment is not a sign of failure, but of depth. It means you have reached the wound, and the wound, though it cries out, secretly longs to be cleansed. I say to you, then, do not interpret the world's resentment as a verdict upon your worth. See it as the symptom of the world's illness. The empath is not hated for being false, but for being true. You are resented because you disturb the slumber of the collective ego, and this disturbance is necessary for transformation. Without it, the unconscious festers and societies decay in their blindness. With it, there is at least the possibility of awakening. There's also an alchemical dimension to all this. Alchemy teaches us that transformation occurs when opposites are brought together and endured in the fire. The empath embodies this union. The outer world of appearances and the inner world of feeling converge in their nervous system. This is unbearable for those who wish to keep the two separate. They resent the alchemist for holding the tension of opposites, but in the long arc of time, it is precisely this alchemy that renews the soul of the collective. The empath's suffering is therefore not wasted. It is the crucible in which a culture's shadow may one day be transmuted into light. Yet you must be warned again. To carry this consciously is essential. If you fall into unconscious identification, you become the victim, the martyr who is crushed without transformation. But if you recognize the archetypal pattern, if you see that the resentment you bear is not simply about you, but about the collective shadow, then you are no longer merely wounded. You become the wounded healer. You endure, but you endure with knowledge, and knowledge transforms pain into power. And so I tell you, the resentment of others, painful as it is not the end of the story. It is the beginning, for through it, you are initiated into the great drama of the psyche. You stand not only for yourself, but for the forgotten parts of humanity. Your tears are the tears of ages. Your isolation echoes the prophets and poets who came before you. And though resentment will always follow you, so too will meaning, for you are part of the archetypal lineage that carries the soul across centuries. Do not collapse. Therefore, under the weight of resentment, see it for what it is. The shadows cry. The ego's defense, the collective's fear. Hold steady and know that in holding, you serve not only yourself, but the deep, slow work of human transformation. For one day, perhaps long after you are gone, the resentment will turn to gratitude, and those who despised you will realize that you carried what they could not bear. There is a mystery in the way the soul uses suffering as a crucible. The empath, who finds themselves resented, does not merely endure a social discomfort or psychological inconvenience. They are undergoing an initiation, a passage into the depths of individuation. For individuation is never born of comfort. It is born of tension, conflict, rejection, and the confrontation with shadow. And the resentment of others is one of the most refined instruments by which the self chisels the ego, stripping away illusions until only the essence remains. When you are resented, You are denied belonging in the collective. This feels like exile. And indeed it is. Yet exile is often the beginning of true seeing. As long as one is comfortably absorbed into the group, one rarely questions, rarely descends into the unconscious, rarely seeks the inner source of authority. It is precisely when the crowd rejects you, when family resents you, when friends whisper against you, that you are thrust into the wilderness of the soul. And in that wilderness, you encounter not only your loneliness, but the archetypal figures that guide transformation, the wise old man, the anima, the shadow, the self. Thus, resentment is not the end of your story, but the doorway into it. I think of a patient who dreamt that she stood at the gates of her childhood home, but the gates were locked and her family stood inside. Looking at her with cold eyes, she begged to be let in, but they turned away. In despair, she wandered into the forest behind the house. There, in the depths of the trees, she met a luminous figure who handed her a lantern. When she awoke, she wept not only from the pain of rejection, but from the strange joy of having been given a light. This dream reveals the truth. The resentment of those closest to you may shut you out from belonging, but it also pushes you toward the inner source, toward the archetype of the self, which alone can give you light that does not fade. To endure resentment without collapsing requires the alchemy of transformation. The first step is to recognize projection. You must see clearly that much of the hostility you encounter does not belong to you, but to those who cast it. If you internalize it blindly, it will poison you, filling you with shame and self-doubt. But if you can step back and say, this is their shadow, not my essence, then you are no longer a victim. You become the mirror that reflects without absorbing. This is the shield of consciousness. And it is forged slowly, through trial and error, through the practice of discernment. But awareness alone is not enough. You must also allow resentment to shape you into strength. For each time you are rejected, you are forced to anchor yourself, not in others' opinions, but in your inner truth. Ach snea, each dismissal, each cold glance, teaches you to stand alone, to listen not to the crowd, but to the whisper of the self within. Over time, this strengthens the psychic muscles of autonomy, until you are no longer swayed by the fickle tides of approval. You become like a tree rooted deep in the earth, unmoved by passing storms. This, I tell you, is one of the hidden gifts of being resented. It forces you into authenticity. Resentment also teaches you compassion, for once you understand that those who resent you are acting out of their own fear, shame, and repression, you can hold them differently. You no longer see only hostility. You see the wounded child behind the mask, the terrified ego clinging to illusion. This does not mean you accept abuse or abandon boundaries, but it means you no longer hate in return. You stand with clear eyes, knowing that their resentment is their unconscious attempt to defend themselves. And in this clarity, you discover the paradoxical power of empathy. You can feel their hostility without absorbing it. You can understand their pain without sacrificing yourself to it. This is the transition from unconscious empathy to conscious empathy. Unconscious empathy drowns, it absorbs everything, even poison, and collapses. Conscious empathy discerns, it feels deeply, but it chooses what to carry and what to leave. It knows that some burdens are not yours, and that your task is not to save everyone, but to remain faithful to your own vocation, The resentment of others is therefore the training ground for this maturity. Each time you are resented, you are offered the chance to practice this discernment, to stand in empathy without losing yourself. Now, let us consider the archetype of the alchemist. In the alchemical texts, base matter is placed into the vessel and subjected to fire. It blackens, putrefies, dissolves. This stage is called the nigredo, the blackening, the death of form. To be resented is to enter your own nigredo. You are blackened by the hostility of others, reduced to ashes of self-doubt, stripped of illusions. But the alchemists taught that the nigredo is not the end. Out of it comes the albedo, the whitening, the dawning of new clarity. And from that, the rubedo, the reddening, the flowering of new life. The empath who endures resentment passes through this very process. First, the dark despair of rejection, then the illumination of inner truth, then the birth of a new strength, radiant and indestructible. But beware, some souls remain stuck in the nigredo, consumed by bitterness at being resented. They replay every slight, every rejection, and their hearts harden. This is the danger to become resentful in return. And here I must warn you, if the empath answers resentment with resentment, the cycle tightens, the gift is lost, and the soul collapses into cynicism. The true task is to allow resentment to burn away illusion, but not to extinguish compassion, to remain soft without being weak, strong without being cruel. This is the fine balance of the individuated empath. And what then is the fruit of this long alchemy? It is not that resentment disappears, no, you will always be resented by some. The fruit is that resentment no longer controls you. You no longer interpret it as evidence of your failure. You no longer collapse beneath its weight. Instead, you see it as confirmation of your calling. You know that to embody empathy in a world that fears the soul is to provoke hostility. And you accept this as the cost of authenticity. You carry your gift with dignity, no longer begging for approval, no longer shrinking in shame. You stand as a witness to the truth of human interconnectedness. Even if the world resents you for it, this, my friends, is individuation, to stand firm in your own soul, beyond the reach of the crowd's judgment, beyond the sway of resentment, to become who you are, not who others wish you to be, to embody empathy, not as a wound, but as a vocation, and to know that though many will resent you, some, perhaps only a few, will be transformed by your presence. For the mirror that others curse may, for one brave soul, become the mirror that awakens. And so I leave you with this. The resentment you face is not your enemy, but your teacher. It drives you into the wilderness, where the self hands you the lantern of inner light. It purifies you in the fire of alchemy, stripping away illusion until your essence shines. It trains you in discernment, teaching you to feel without drowning, to love without losing yourself, and it anchors you in authenticity so that you stand rooted in the ground of your own being, unmoved by the shifting tides of others' opinions. This is why empaths are resented, not because they are weak, but because they are powerful. They reveal what others cannot face, and in doing so, they embody the eternal drama of shadow and light. To walk this path is to suffer, yes, but also to awaken. And if you can endure, If you can carry this vocation with consciousness, you will not only survive resentment, you will transmute it into wisdom, strength, and love. And now, as we draw this journey to its close, let us look directly into the mystery that has haunted us from the beginning. Why are empaths always the ones people resent the most? We have circled it from many sides, through projection, through shadow, through the scapegoat archetype, through envy, through the collective unconscious. Each path has led us deeper into the same truth. The empath is resented because they awaken what others would rather leave asleep. They stir the hidden chambers of the psyche, and the psyche, startled, retaliates. The resentment is not about who you are. It is about what you evoke. You are a threshold, and thresholds are always feared. Yet there is another dimension, one more profound, and it must be spoken now. Beneath all resentment lies longing. Every person who resents you secretly envies you, not for your suffering, but for your capacity to feel. They resent because they are cut off from their own depths, and your presence makes this exile unbearable. The hostility is therefore a disguise. Beneath it, a secret admiration trembles. The child in them longs for what you carry, and so, if you endure long enough, if you do not collapse, some will one day come to you with tears instead of scorn. They will confess, I hated you because you showed me myself, but now I thank you, for you carried the mirror until I was ready to look. This, though rare, is the ultimate fruit of your burden. You must not expect it often. Most will remain in resentment, preferring blindness. But even if one soul awakens because of you, even if one life is transformed by the mirror you held, is that not worth the suffering? For to awaken one soul is to shift the pattern of generations. The empathy you embody is not wasted. It ripples through the unseen layers of the collective, seeding change where you cannot measure it. You may never see the results, but the unconscious remembers. The archetypal work you do echoes beyond your own life. This is why, in the deepest sense, the resentment you face is sacred. It is the fire through which the world tests whether you can carry the gift. Anyone can be loved for being agreeable, for conforming, for numbing themselves to fit the collective, but to be resented and still remain faithful to your soul, that is initiation. That is the mark of one who serves not the ego of the crowd, but the self of the world. You become a vessel of the deeper order, a servant of what is eternal. Now, I want you to imagine something. Imagine you are standing in a great hall, filled with people. They are speaking, laughing, boasting, trading masks with one another. At first, you try to join them, to smile and blend in, but soon you feel the familiar shift, the eyes that narrow, the whispers that begin, the subtle exclusion. Resentment arrives again. You feel the sting, the loneliness, the old wound, and then, instead of fleeing or collapsing, you turn inward, you close your eyes, and you see a flame within you, small but steady. You realize this flame is not dependent on their approval. It does not flicker when they scorn you. It burns by its own source, eternal, inexhaustible. You open your eyes, and though the hall is still filled with resentment, you are no longer undone. You stand in your own light. This vision is not fantasy. It is the truth of individuation. The final task of the empath, therefore, is integration. To integrate means to take back what you have projected outward, to own your own shadow, to stop confusing others' resentment with the truth of your being. You must see clearly. Some of the hostility you face is theirs, some is yours. You too resent yourself at times for feeling too much, for being too different, for carrying what you did not choose. And this self-resentment, if unconscious, attracts the resentment of others like iron to a magnet. Only when you forgive yourself, when you embrace your sensitivity as your path rather than your flaw, does the dynamic shift. Integration begins with self-acceptance. The day you stop resenting your own empathy is the day the world's resentment loses its deepest hold on you. And what happens then? You become whole, not invulnerable, but whole. You know, both your gift and your wound. You no longer seek to escape empathy, nor do you drown in it. You stand in it as one stands in a river, feeling the current, but no longer swept away. This wholeness radiates, and though some will still resent you, others will sense your integration and be drawn not by need, but by recognition. These are your true companions, those who have also walked through resentment into individuation. With them, you will no longer feel alone. You will form a fellowship of the deep, a communion of souls who live by the truth of the self. And so, in the end, resentment is not the curse, it seems. It is the necessary companion of empathy, the shadow that proves the light. To be resented is to be tested, to be refined, to be called beyond the comfort of the crowd into the authenticity of the soul. Do not flee it. Do not fear it. Face it with consciousness. Endure it with dignity. Transform it with compassion. For in doing so, you fulfill the very reason you were given this gift. Not to be adored, but to awaken. Empaths are resented the most because they remind humanity of what it most fears and most needs, the soul itself. And if you can carry that reminder, if you can stand steady even under resentment, then you have accomplished what you dare. You have embodied the archetype of the healer, the mirror, the bearer of light. This is your vocation. This is your burden. This is your glory. And now, as I leave you, I say, do not ask to be spared resentment. Ask instead to be strengthened by it. Do not ask to be loved by all. Ask instead to remain faithful to your own flame, even when others scorn it. For the flame within you is older than their fear, brighter than their shadow, stronger than their resentment. It is the self, the eternal core, the spark of the divine, and as long as you walk in its light, you will never truly be broken.